As a student at Bob Jones University, often we would listen to the radio on Friday nights. You know, that was our wild activity. But they always had that program Unshackled, and it's played on KHMG as well. How many have heard of that Unshackled? Yeah. How many have heard of the man Mel Trotter? Have you ever heard Mel Trotter's story? Mel Trotter has a ministry, or it's named after him. It's in Grand Rapids. Pastor and I were talking about this morning. It's for homeless people. But the background story of how Mel came to Christ captivated me, and it reminded me as I was studying this of the damages of sin. Let me read a little bit from his story. From the time I began going to school and playing ball in my hometown, it was easy for me to make friends. And as a result of me making friends, there was a lot of social events I was invited to. And many of these social events, there was alcohol there. Well, it wasn't long before the social drink was not reserved for special occasions, but it became a morning, noon, and night experience. I went from one job to another, from one place to live, and each time both the job and the living quarters became less desirable. One day it found me in Chicago, living in a rat-infested cellar apartment in the worst section of the city. Why my wife and my little child stayed with me, God only knows, for the pain and suffering it caused them cannot be described. One day our little boy was taken seriously ill. A faithful doctor came over knowing he wasn't going to get paid, but he diagnosed the case and he took out some money, thrust it into my hand and said, "Mel, run. Don't walk to the drugstore, which is 2 blocks from here. It may even now be too late. Hurry." I climbed the stairs and looked to my left, and sure enough, I saw a drugstore about 2 blocks away. But the bar was only a half a block away. I blindly rushed into the bar, threw the money on the table, and shouted, "Let's all drink, it's on me." That night, I got so drunk, I didn't wake up until the next day. When I arrived at home, I saw that someone was talking very quietly to my wife, and they were crying. I then looked into the other room, and there had been no furniture before, but now there was a little box on a stand. As I went over and looked into the box, I saw that it was the body of my little son, but it looked very different. Someone had put clean new clothes on him and even a pair of brand new little boots. As I stood there, I craved another drink. As the urge overwhelmed me, I slipped the new boots off from the cold feet of my precious son, left the apartment and sold those little shoes for a few pennies and bought another drink. One day, after more debauchery and drinking, I decided to end it all. I headed for Lake Michigan to drown. As I wove my way down Clark Street, I was suddenly given a push by someone who said, "Why don't you go in there, bud? It's nice and warm." And someone sat me in a chair, and a man was speaking as if he knew all about me. He said, "Perhaps you've come in here tonight and you haven't even planned it. In fact, you've decided that you're going to end it all. You feel no one cares. And I assure you, there is hope for you. My friend, I'm here to tell you are wrong, and you will find all of your answers when you come to Jesus Christ and receive Him as your personal Savior." The place was Pacific Garden Mission. The speaker was Henry Monroe. And that night, God saved Mel Trotter and changed him. And he became a preacher of the gospel. But I have one thought, and you do too. At what cost? At what cost did Mel Trotter pay? Sin takes you farther than you want to go. It keeps you longer than you want to stay, and it costs more than you want to pay. David found that too. I want a relationship built on that with my God. It happened in Rwanda. Rwanda is a country in the middle of Africa. And in the 1990s, they had a tremendous civil war there. And I want to read you what happened. Once the killing started, it seemed like it would never stop. Over the course of 100 days in the summer of 1994, 1 million Rwandan Tutsis were slaughtered by Hutu militia in an eruption of ethnic hatred. The brutality and scope of massacre defied imagination and shocked the world. When a fragile ceasefire was restored, Rwanda was in shambles. Beyond the horrific loss of life was an even more daunting problem. How could you rebuild a society when half of the people were victims and the other half were murderers? The justice system was quickly overwhelmed. More than 100,000 prisoners were incarcerated to wait trial that would have taken years. That's when the Christian church stepped forward with a radical solution based on the model of God's dealing with humanity on the cross of Christ. Instead of relying on the traditional legal system to put things right, Rwandans were invited to tap into the healing power of forgiveness. So now the victims and the perpetrators would meet in villages. And they would admit what they did and openly confess to the victims and cast themselves on the mercy of those they had grossly offended and abused. Giant billboards were erected along the roadsides. Tell what you know, admit what you have done. The truth will heal the land. And slowly, forgiveness began to heal the tattered hearts and broken spirits of Rwanda. Deborah Nyakabarika's story captured the incredible power of what took place. Deborah's son was murdered as an act of ethnic genocide. Months after the killing, a young man visited Deborah. And he said, I killed your son. Take me to the authorities and let them deal with me as they will. I have not slept since I shot him. Every time I lie down, I see you praying, and I know you're praying for me. Deborah answered, you are no longer an animal, but a man taking responsibility for your actions. I do not want to add death to death. Then Deborah did the extraordinary. But I want you to restore justice by replacing the son you killed. I'm asking you to become my son. When you visit me, I will care for you. Today, that young man is an adopted member of her household. What an amazing picture of the undeserved grace of God demonstrated us in Jesus Christ, because it was our sin that killed God's Son. But in return, He forgave and opened the arms of a Father to embrace all who would come to Him. And because of this radical mercy, condemned sinners like us are transformed into the children of God. That God I want a relationship with. That God that would forgive me when my sin caused His Son death and He calls me His child, I want a relationship with that God. And folks, it's that desire that will help us have victory over sin, that I want a relationship with God more than my sin.